Hello and welcome to this section. In this section, we will learn the relative positioning rule. The relative positioning rule is the most important rule in the layout of HeCode, so we must pay enough attention to it. This section contains a lot of content. If you can't understand it in the first study, you can watch this video again and understand it with our actual combat. In this lesson, we will learn what our relative positioning principle is, and then we will learn which relative positioning layout widget is available in HeCode. Then we will learn the widget in the relative positioning environment and what special property it has. Finally, we will learn to package and expand these two important property. First, let's learn the first point, our relative positioning principle. Relative positioning is the natural document flow of HTML. The newly added objects will be automatically arranged on the stage from top to bottom, or from left to right. How can we understand such a sentence? Let's open an application to understand such a sentence. First of all, we take this sentence off, then we open our editor application name, enter a relative location, and then click Create. Our default web applet is a relatively positioning environment, so the front-end environment of a stage of such an application created by us is a relatively positioning environment. So first of all, we can understand the first sentence, that is, the newly added objects will be automatically arranged on such a stage from top to bottom. We select the stage, and we add a text widget on the stage. We can see that I select the stage and click the text, and the text will automatically appear on the stage. It has a very large area with our absolute positioning. When we add a widget, we need to select one of our objects first, and then we need to make a drawing on the stage. Then, he creates the objects we create according to the position and size we draw. In our relative positioning environment, this is not necessary. We just need to select a negative object of it after one by one add. You can add such a series of widget. For example, if I add another text, I can also find that the newly added text is automatically arranged in the next volume of such text before I add it. Then I select front end, and I continue to add an input box for him. It can be found that such an input box also automatically appears in the next volume of such text we just added. Maybe some students want to ask, saying that you have understood from top to bottom, so how to rehearse the automatic arrangement from left to right? From left to right, we need to use one of our layout widget. When we come to the side of one of our layout widget, we can find that there is a widget called row here. We add such a row widget under the front end. We can find that the row widget also meets the overall relative positioning rules. So when I add this row group, it is a bad policy to automatically appear in such an input box. Therefore, any widget in a relative positioning environment should meet such a rule, even if it is a relative positioning widget itself, which is no exception. Then, we select such a line. We first add a text in the line, and we can find that a text appears here. Then I add an input box in this line, and we can find that the next input box appears on the right side of such a text. Therefore, you will fully understand it, which is the so-called the principle of relative positioning, is that the newly added objects in the natural document flow are automatically arranged on our stage from top to bottom, or from left to right. Next, we will learn a series of special properties of relative positioning layout widget. First of all, let's take a look at which layout widget is relatively positioned. The first point is the positioning environment that we choose when we create the new application. By default, we choose a relatively positioning environment. Then our front end will naturally be a relatively positioning environment. Here, we can take a look and find out that the front end that we choose is a relatively positioning environment. It has a series of relative positioning of the special property, and the special property will be explained later. Then the second point is its row and column. The row and column are in the layout widget on the left side of this side, when front end is selected. You can see that this side is a row and this side is a column. In fact, the usage of the row and column is almost identical. It is only to help us to arrange the newly added objects from top to bottom, or from left to right. The row widget and its internal widget are arranged one by one from left to right, while the column widget is arranged from top to bottom. We can find that our frontend is actually equivalent to a column widget, and its widget is arranged one by one from top to bottom, and then down is one of our panels. The panel is also on the side of our layout container. It is one of our panel widget. In fact, panel widget has many similarities with our split. Generally speaking, when we use the panel, we need to use a drop-down. You can see that there is a drop-down refresh effect here after we pull it down, or it is the effect of pulling it up and loading it to the bottom. Generally, only one drop-down is used. We will use such a panel during refresh and pull-up loading. Then there is our banner. We learned in the last lesson that there are two kinds of banners. One is the absolute positioning banner, and the other is our relative positioning banner. In our relative positioning banner, one of its positioning environment is also a relative positioning. If you select such a relative positioning banner, its celebrity widget is white, right? We have told you before that if the widget in it is added in white, it proves that it is located in a relatively positioned environment. Then let's take a look at a series of special property owned by relative positioning layout widget. First, it is a property such as auto wrap. Auto wrap property is a special property owned by our line widget, which is a very important series of property. We select such a text. We paste a series of text in the line. In fact, it is equivalent to adding another series of text in the line. When I add a text, I add another text. The position here may not be enough. Then I add another text. You can find that the next text appears on the next side automatically. And why does such a wrap property happen? There are two conditions to meet. Which two conditions? The first point is in the line, because it is horizontally arranged, and the width of all its subcomponents is greater than the width of all its subcomponents, that is, the default width. Then it will appear such a condition of line wrapping. This is very easy to understand. For example, if your line is not full, how can it help you to line wrapping? Then the second point is that our line widget must check such a line wrap property. By default, we open it for you. If we turn off such a mobile phone as automation, we can find that there is no line break. Even if I add more, it will continue to extend to the right, and it will not happen a new line effect. And then its second point, the special property, is to cut property and scroll bar. First of all, let's see where the cutting property is. First of all, we select our row widget. Because our row widget itself is a relatively positioned container widget, it has such a special property, that is, one of our cutting property. We can find out whether our default cutting property is or not, and there are many cutting property that can be carried out of choice. For example, the cutting property uses the scroll bar, x-axis, y-axis and double axis, which are the cutting property. How can we understand them? Here I will give you a simple demonstration. First of all, we can see that I have turned off an auto wrap property like mine, but I have added a lot of text here. Where is the more text? Did you go to a right? So there is a condition that the width of a child widget is much larger than the width of a row like ours. In this case, it can use our shear property to scroll. Here I change one of its shear property to a shear property minus x-axis. X-axis is our horizontal axis, and y-axis is our vertical axis. Since we currently use row widget, if it wants to scroll horizontally, it should turn on x-axis. Here I turn on x-axis. It can be found that there is such a scroll bar here. Then when I slide such a scroll bar, a series of contents on the right will appear automatically. So in combination with the auto wrap and the clipping property, here I will tell you how to make such a lateral sliding effect. Of course, if you think such a scroll bar is too ugly, you can also check a hidden scroll bar here, which will help you hide such a scroll bar on the PC. In fact, this scroll bar is unique to the PC side. If you are a mobile phone side or mobile side to have a preview, you can directly slide this piece to have a sliding effect, and such a scroll bar will not appear. Okay, we've finished the horizontal rolling. Next, let's talk about the vertical rolling. Now that I'm talking about a vertical scrolling, I'll add a column under the front end. Let's set the height of the column a little lower, and set it to 200 pixels. Then we add a series of widget in the column. Here I still add a series of text, and we can find out whether the default profile property even has the full text of a subtext the height of the department has exceeded, and it still naturally overflows an effect. On this side, the height of all its subcomponents is greater than the height of the whole 200 pixels, so it meets the requirement that we can turn on the cutting property. Then here I choose a y-axis to scroll. It can be found that the excess part will not exceed the height we set. If we want to view the excess part, we need to use one of our scrolling property, that is, our scroll bar to view it. In the cutting property, there is also an effect called cutting property. I first select it as the default. If it is not, we can find that if it is not, we can check the redundant content, and we do not have the effect of scroll bar. What does it mean to change the cut property to yes? It can be understood as whether to cut or not. It's like someone holding a pair of scissors asking if you want to cut this thing off. When you say yes, he will help you to reduce the redundant part, and you can see that there is no scroll bar here, so we can understand such a cutting property now. First of all, the first cut property means the extra part. What about the extra part? Lost it, right? So this is the function of cutting property yes, and cutting property no means the redundant part. What to do? Let's show it to you, but the display will not have the effect of scrolling. The following scrolling parts include double axis, x-axis and y-axis, that is, if your horizontal has exceeded the maximum range, and you want it to start a horizontal scrolling, you can use -x-axis. If its longitudinal direction exceeds the maximum range, you can use a neck y-axis to make a roll. Of course, if you want it to make a roll on both sides, you can check such a double axis attribute. But we must pay attention to the opening condition of the scroll bar must be for a force, the sum of the height of its widget must be greater than its own height. Then the next special property is our alignment. Let's take a look at our alignment. In fact, many students will have a basic question here, that is, why does it appear in the upper left corner by default, and why does it not appear in the middle? Why didn't it appear in the center? Why didn't it appear in the upper right corner? This is actually controlled by such an property as alignment. We can come to our front end first. You can see that front end is actually a cutting property of ours. Because we said that when you check a relative positioning environment, front end is a very big crack in itself, but now what we want to study is not our front, we want to study one of its alignment methods, including our numerical alignment and horizontal alignment. Then first of all, we will look at our horizontal alignment, which is a pattern of its left and right alignment. The more default we choose to be a left-hand effect, so you can see whether the series of widget we added here have a left force attracting him all the time, so he has been leaning on the left. And you see, if you change its horizontal alignment to a middle, you can find that it is like the central axis has a gravitational force aligned in the middle. For the same horizontal pair, if it is selected as the right, it will be aligned on the right. Here, let's change it to the default one to the left. The same is true for numerical alignment. If numerical alignment is at the top, it is at the top, and in the middle, it is at the center, and then at the bottom, it is at the bottom. The most important thing here is to share an equidistant alignment with you. Let's check such an equidistant alignment. We can take a look at it. Look at it between such a widget and this widget, they are equidistant, and the widget are equidistant. What is the widget in this? This is a line. You can see that the distance between the two of them is also completely equal. The distance between the two of them is also completely equal. Let's collect all the objects here. So what is the equal distance actually doing? It is to distribute the components at the same level in an equal distance. Note that it is at the same level as for a front end, all its sub-widget includes such a column, such a row, and such an input box, so it is said that it has no equal spacing, and he does not care about how much content you install in it. He only cares about a series of widget of the same level, which is a very important effect. For our front end, because it is a column itself, it is arranged vertically, so it has equal spacing of values. We come to a line on our side. Forget it. Let's recreate a line. Let's recreate a new line. Then we add two such texts to the line. Then we select a level of the line and use an equal spacing for the play, because in itself, it is arranged from left to right. What's the difference between equal spacing? What kind of special use of a scene? Here I preview to show you an effect. It can be found that my next line uses equal spacing, that is, when you look at the two texts on the left and right, it will naturally be located on the left and right, and then our debugging will be opened. Let's see that I make an automatic change to the window. What can we find is a very magical thing. There are two components like this. No matter how my window changes, they are located on both sides of the window. You can often see this kind of scene in any place. Yes, here we can come to one of our editors and the interface. You can see our menu bar on the right side of F and X on the left. We also open a check here, and you can find it is the one on our right, always located at the upper right. Then when I pull and shrink on my left, he also makes a statement with us. Therefore, you see, we often use such an equidistant method when we make adaptation. This will be explained again in our subsequent courses to deepen everyone's impression. But at the end of the day, what we use is actually an property such as equidistant, and then finally an environment-wide property. First of all, you can see that when I select such a column widget, I turn on one of the environment components here, and I can find that there are different pixels for me to choose from. The large screen width here is how wide it is when the width of the whole window is greater than 1600, how wide it is when it is on the PC side, and how wide it is when it is on the small screen PC side. How can we understand this? Here I change an example we want to set to a red version. Let's take a look at it on the PC side of the large screen. I let it have a pixel of 1200. If it is on the PC, I let it have a pixel of 900. If it is on the small screen, I let it have a pixel of 600. If it is on the small screen iPad, we let it have a pixel of 500. Then if it is on the mobile phone frame, we let it have a pixel of 200 pixels, and then you can find that I dynamically set a width for a column like ours. Let's have a preview next. Let's start a debugging. What's its width at present? We can find that its width is 1200 according to our view, right? I've seen 1200 here. Why 1200? Because what is the width of our whole window at present? You see, according to a prompt on my side, the width of the whole window is 1606, which is greater than 1600. Therefore, in response to an environment here, when the width is greater than 1600, it is displayed as 1200. Then you see, with my dragging, I am less than 1600 now. It is in the range of more than 1500. You see, it will become the second width, which will become 900 width. What scenario will this be used in? In fact, this is also a scenario that we often use when we are doing multi-terminal adaptation. For example, if you are in the large screen, how large an area should be displayed for a certain section of your content? If you are in the medium frequency, what area should be displayed for a certain section of your content? We will make use of our environment width. Environment width is also the attribute of our workers. It includes that our industry has such environment width. If you want to dynamically set its width, you can set an effect of the width of our environment. Next, let's learn a series of special property of widget in relative positioning environment. It has the following special property. The first one is the width and height of percentage. Let's first understand the width and height of such a percentage. We select such a text widget and use such a text as an example. It turns a background color into a blue, and then I set its width to 80, and then we need to make a percentage of the width and height. How to make it? Note, I input a percentage mark in the input box here, and then click the blank place to make a trial delivery. It can be found that a symbol here becomes a percentage mark. 80% means that it inherits 80% of the width of the secondary container. So let's preview the effect next. It can be found that as the width of my interface changes, the width here is also changing dynamically, which is a special effect only in this relative environment. The same height can also be set as a percentage of a width. For example, it needs to occupy 10% of the whole page height. You can set it here, and then you can preview it again. You can also find a height of it, or you can make a change automatically. We will not make a demonstration here. But what I want to say here is that generally speaking, we rarely use a percentage of 80% and 10% to make a relative positioning layout. Later, we will tell you a better method in our study. You should try to avoid using percentage to make a production. Generally speaking, if we use percentage, it is often 100% to let it inherit a width or height of all subcontainers. Then the next one is our maximum and minimum width and height. Where does this property come from? We select such a row that we just set equal spacing on the lower side. 2. We can find the maximum width and minimum width in the typesetting setting. How can we understand this? First of all, I will show you an effect of its maximum width. For example, here I set the maximum width to 1200 pixels, and then I will make a preview. Then here I will click a check, and then we will set one width to the minimum size. For convenience, I will set a little background color for it, and we will set it to 1. Let's have a preview of such a TV. You can see that at present, I set a maximum width of 1200 pixels for it, and since its default width is 100%, what does it mean? It inherits a width of our entire window, so you see, with the increase of the width on our upper side, it also inherits a series of widths, and then continues to increase. You can find what happens when I reach 1200 pixels. Is it no longer increasing? Why not? Because I set a maximum width for it. Even if I set the width to 100%, it can inherit a width of our subcontainer. However, due to a limitation of our maximum width, when it reaches 1200 pixels, it cannot continue to grow. This is its maximum width. In fact, the maximum width is the most beautiful thing in the world. When you look at these two people, it seems that they are moving away. In the end, you can't even see each other's figure. However, you find that when you reach a certain distance, it may be such a 1200 image, he chooses to stop and wait for you. You two will always maintain the farthest distance law is 1200 pixels. It is always waiting for you to catch up with it. Even if his goal has gone far, even his dream has gone far, he has not continued to pursue. He is still waiting for you here. If there is the happiest thing in the world, there must be the cruelest thing in the world. What is the cruelest thing? Of course, it is our minimum width. Here we set a minimum width of 900 pixels for our minimum width. Similarly, we set a default width of 100% for it. Then I have a preview. We can see that at the beginning, our entire interface has a width of 1679, and our width setting the default width is 900 pixels. The window width is 100%, so as our width becomes smaller, the distance between two people will slowly change. It's like a rush process, but look at the distance above, it's 975. If you continue to the border, you can find that he doesn't move forward at the moment of 900. Even if the external resistance has given him enough resistance, he will not rush forward to you, and this is actually the furthest distance in the world. You see a person rushing towards you, but suddenly one day he stopped and he never came to you again. In fact, this is the most cruel thing in the world, which is our smallest width. Therefore, through our happiest and most cruel things, I hope you can remember these two attributes. Generally speaking, when we use these two properties, they will be used in accordance with our default width, and the default width is usually set to a percentage, and the approximate rate is set to 100%, which is to let him inherit a width of our attached container. Next, we will talk about special property, Screenwriter. The so-called Screenwriter is actually a property that we often use in the layout. We first change such a waiting room in the front end to a top, and we will find that between such two widget, and between the two widget in our line, they are too close. Even in very many cases the weather is not beautiful. What should I do at this time? As I have told you before, we cannot set the XY coordinate of the widget in this component. It appears automatically, so we will set it by setting a Screenwriter, and then the Screenwriter includes our internal Screenwriter and our external Screenwriter. First of all, let's look at our internal Screenwriter. The internal Screenwriter is actually a square that has been set. Then it squeezes internally, which is our internal margin. You can vividly understand it as the content inside. You have made a square box, and then you plug cotton into the box, and then fill the content inside, so that it will not be close to the box, and the so-called outer margin is like a series of air walls on the outside. After you set the outer edge, the outside things are isolated by such an air wall, and then shrink such a content here to facilitate everyone to check. Let's use such a text for a demonstration. Let's tone such a color a little lighter. First of all, let's look at the foreign writers. First of all, is it easy to understand the foreign writers? From the outside screenwriter, and what is the outside screenwriter? It's our air wall, right? So here I set it as an outward screenwriter of 50. When I handed it in, you can find that he was separated by 50 outside, so he naturally gave him a little distance. In fact, do you think I set him up as an out-of-school screenwriter is the same as I set him up as an out-of-school screenwriter? In fact, it's basically similar. You see, if I give him an external screenwriter of 50, why can only you give me a distance? He also wants to give him a distance below. See, so he gave him an external screenwriter of 50. This is the external margin, but how do you understand the internal margin? Let's select such a content and set the inner margin. For example, let's give him a little more down there. For example, let's go down there for 50. We can find that a dotted line here is very obvious, that is, the lower inner screenwriter is actually stuffing cotton inside. Similarly, we also set him an upper inner screenwriter, and give him an upper inner screenwriter for 50. We can find a width here, it hasn't changed, because we have written down the height here. We'd better restore the height first, and then you see that the distance over there is a little upward. Similarly, we can also set the left inner margin, for example, a left inner margin of 50. The left side of this side gives him a series of distances, and then I'm actually here you can have a simple preview. You see, we can select such a text first. Let's look for such a model. For the model, you can see that the padding here is one of the writers they're 50-50, and then its margin is its outer edge 5 from the upper edge, and then there is no setting on both sides. You see, it is actually completely consistent with the setting on our corresponding side. Therefore, for screenwriters, it is often used when we make a local adjustment and the extrusion state between elements. How do we set it the feature of the column? Okay. Finally, we will talk about some special property. Our package opening and automatic 3 property are also our very important 3 property. We often use these 3 property when we do self-adaptive. First of all, let's talk about the simplest one, that is, our automatic property, because we have already seen such an automatic property when we use the text just now. When we call it automatic attribute, you can first select such a width, then click your backspace key, and then carry out a trial handover. It will become an automatic large 1 little. What is automatic? Why is there such an automatic size? Let's briefly talk about it here. You see, because we have set an inner margin on the upper and left sides, for such a text, the size of its upper and left sides has been determined, but its overall width and height have not been determined. Yes, why? Because its content can be dynamic. For example, you can see that one of its widths has changed after I input a series of contents. Therefore, in this case, after we modify its contents, a series of changes may occur to one of its displayed contents. We can choose to delete one of its widths and heights to make it easier for us. It becomes an automatic effect, which is generally used on the text widget, and then we will wrap and open one of our property, including and open the palm, which is really too important. Let's read its property content first. The package is the sum of the width and height of all internal components, while the opening is the sum of the height and width of its subcontainer minus the height and width of elements in the same layer, and the rest belongs to him. How do you understand this? Let's give it such 2 points. As for this special reminder, please take a look at it first. If you find that your open property has no effect one day, you can turn around and take a look at one of my tips. Then let's take a look at one of our package property. The package property is equal to the sum of the width and height of all the internal components. Let's delete these redundant elements first, delete such an industry and such a series of input boxes, and then leave an example dot. Since I set a height of 200 pixels for it at the beginning, its overall height is 200 pixels. What about the excess part? Then only more than, right? In fact, it has two kinds of property, package and open. So what is its package property? When you click a package on my side, you can see that its height is suddenly equal to the height of all the widget in it. So how can we understand the package? We can imagine that we take a cloth and wrap all the contents in it. We can take as many as it is. Similarly, if you look at my width, I can also set it as a package. If you look at it like this, it will be a width of the largest widget in the area. Then we select one of the text widget, and we will lose one to it. As for the content, you can see that I have changed one of the width and height of such an example into a package. So if you look at the width package, it will automatically find the longest widget in it and carry out a package for the widget with the largest width. And because I choose the height to package, you can see how high the widget inside is and how much it will display. So the package is actually equivalent to the size of such a width and height, and how much the content inside is, it will display how much and will not waste a little bit. It is an effect of such a package. Then if I set the width and height of a percentage for him, when he has set it as package or spread, for example, change the width of this side to a percentage, and then input such a percentage. When I enter 100 again, it can be found that it will become a percentage of a width, and then the spread property of a package here will be automatic and natural. It disappeared. What if I set it to a pixel when it itself is a percentage? For example, I will input a 200 here, and then I will input a px English, and then click the perspective to find a symbol behind it, which will naturally become a pixel symbol, and then this small skill is what you need to master. This is our package property, and the package is the width of all internal components high sum. Then the next more important property is our open property. The open property is equal to the sum of the height or width of our subcontainer minus the sum of the height and width of our elements in the same layer. First of all, in order to facilitate understanding, I will add a line widget in my front end. Come out, let's give him a little color for this line of widget, and then we will add another line widget under the front end. We will drag the line widget out and put it on the top. What does it mean to give him a blue and open it? The opening is the sum of the height of the subcontainer and the height of the elements close to the same layer. How do we understand this? You see, we can understand that front-end is the size of a heaven and a earth that we set up when Pango was the pioneer of the whole world. However, since the sky is one piece tall every day, and the earth sinks one piece every day, we need to make a dynamic change in such a height. For example, at the beginning, it may be a 300 pixel, and then one day later, it may become a 320 pixel, and then another day later, it may become a 400 pixel, and then finally let it become a 500 pixel. 450 pixels seems to be a little less. I can set it a little more. You find that in such an environment, you look, he filled up all the heaven and earth, but is it really full? No, it just fills up your world. If in other people's world, for example, in other people's iPhone inserted into a world, you find that in such a world is not full, then how do we let him go to the sky? The top is in the sky, and the ground will always stand below, and the middle part of the content can be self-scaled, which is right, and this is what we use to open the property. When I click on open, it will automatically calculate, and the remaining part will open the remaining space. Let's say that when we switch to any mobile phone, even if you are a large screen mobile phone and a small screen mobile phone, it has been changing dynamically, and the height of the upper and lower sides is dead, and the middle policy becomes an open one. This is a very classic three-stage layout. We will talk to you in a subsequent course explain. And then here we learned about wrapping and unfolding, and I will ask you a question. If I set a height of an element as wrapping, what will happen if I change its shear property to the neck y-axis rolling? Let's recall that when its height is set to package, including the height equal to the sum of all internal widget, what are the conditions for the scroll bar to generate? It is the sum of the height of its sub-widget, at least more than its own, right? So since I set the package, its height is always equal to a height of the internal widget. The internal widget can never exceed a height of its parent container, so when you set the height to the package, you can never set the shear property here to scroll. Let me ask you another question. If I set the height of such a column to a brace, and then change one of its cutting properties to a rolling neck outer axis, what effect will this have? Will this have a normal scrolling effect? This is bound to happen, because there are totally two independent property. The property that stretches it here is the height of the parent container, and the sum of the heights of the elements at the same level. The condition for cutting here is as long as the height of the child widget in it is greater than the height of such a column. Such a model should also be accumulated. The above is the whole content of this section. In the next lesson, we will use the content of this lesson in the actual case. Thank you for watching.